The wind cut through the thin fabric of her coat like tiny knives. She pulled her baby closer to her chest, trying to use her own body as a shield against the bitter November cold. Her hands were shaking, though she couldn't tell if it was from the freezing temperature or from everything that had happened just hours ago. She sat on the cold concrete near an old bus stop, her back pressed against the wall. The streetlight above flickered on and off, casting strange shadows that made her flinch. Every sound made her heart race. Every passing car made her wonder if he had come looking for them. The baby whimpered softly, and she looked down at the tiny face barely visible beneath the worn blanket. 9 months old. Just 9 months, and already this little one had seen so much pain. The thought made her chest tighten with guilt and grief. Her left eye was swollen almost completely shut. She could taste blood from her split lip. Her ribs ached with every breath, and there were dark bruises forming on her arms where he had grabbed her. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of helplessness that pressed down on her shoulders. Just this morning, everything had been different. Not good, but manageable. She had learned to walk on eggshells, to keep quiet, to make herself small. She had learned which words would set him off and which silences were safe. For months she had convinced herself that if she could just be better, quieter, more careful, things would improve. But today, he had lost his job. She had seen the rage building in his eyes the moment he walked through the door. She had tried to stay out of his way, had tried to keep the baby quiet, but it hadn't mattered. Nothing she did ever really mattered. The explosion had been sudden and terrifying. One moment she was standing in the kitchen, and the next she was on the floor, her head ringing, her face burning with pain. She had crawled to where the baby was crying in the playpen, her only thought to protect her child. "Get out," he had shouted, his voice raw with anger and something else she couldn't name. "Get out of my house. Both of you," she had begged. God help her, she had actually begged to stay. Where else could they go? She had no money, no phone, no family nearby. Her parents lived 3 states away, and she hadn't spoken to them in over a year. She had been too ashamed to tell them the truth about her life, but he had grabbed their things, what little they had, a diaper bag and the baby's blanket, and thrown them into the hallway of their apartment building. Then he had slammed the door, and she had heard the lock click into place. She had sat in that hallway for almost an hour, hoping he would calm down and let them back in, hoping this was just another one of his episodes that would blow over. But the door never opened. Eventually, a neighbor had asked her to leave because she was causing a scene with her crying baby. So she had walked. 5 miles through the city streets as the sun set and the temperature dropped. She had tried 3 different shelters, but they were all full. One worker had been kind, had given her a bottle of water and some crackers for the baby, but there were simply no beds available. "Come back tomorrow morning," the woman had said. "We might have space then." But tomorrow morning felt impossibly far away. The baby needed milk, needed warmth, needed safety, and she had none of those things to give. People passed by on the sidewalk, their footsteps quick and purposeful. Some glanced at her with pity in their eyes before looking away. Others pretended not to see her at all. She didn't blame them. She probably looked exactly like what she was, someone who had hit rock bottom with nowhere left to fall. A well-dressed woman walked past, talking loudly on her phone about restaurant reservations and weekend plans. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she disappeared around the corner. The contrast between that woman's life and her own felt like a knife twisting in her chest. The baby started crying again, a weak, tired sound that broke her heart. She rocked back and forth, humming a lullaby her own mother used to sing to her. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had promised herself she would be different from her parents, that she would make better choices, build a better life. Instead, here she was, 24 years old with a college degree left unfinished, sitting on a freezing sidewalk with her hungry baby. She thought about calling her parents. The payphone on the corner mocked her with its presence, but she had no coins, and even if she did, what would she say? That they had been right all along? That she should have listened when they warned her about moving to the city, about dropping out of school, about him? Her pride had kept her silent for so long. Pride and shame, 2 sides of the same painful coin. She had wanted so badly to prove she could make it on her own, that she didn't need anyone's help. Look where that had gotten her. The temperature continued to drop. She could see her breath forming small clouds in the air. The baby's lips were starting to look pale, and fear shot through her like electricity. She had read about hypothermia, about how quickly babies could get dangerously cold. She tucked the blanket tighter, opened her coat and pulled the small body against her skin, hoping her body heat would be enough. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes. Time felt strange and stretched out, marked only by the baby's periodic cries and the occasional passing car. Her thoughts began to drift in dangerous directions. What if nobody helped them? What if this was it? What if she had brought her child into this world only to fail her so completely? She found herself praying, though she wasn't sure she believed anyone was listening. She had stopped going to church years ago, had stopped believing that prayers actually changed anything. But desperation makes believers of us all, and she whispered the words into the cold night air anyway. Please, she said to the darkness, to God, to the universe, to anyone who might be listening. Please help us. Please don't let her suffer because of my mistakes. The baby had finally gone quiet, too exhausted and cold to cry anymore. That silence was somehow worse than the crying. She looked down at the tiny face, at the small fingers curled against her chest, and felt a love so fierce and protective it was almost painful. She had made mistakes, so many mistakes, but this child was not one of them. This beautiful, innocent little person deserved so much more than a mother who couldn't even provide basic shelter and warmth. The guilt threatened to swallow her whole. More people walked past. More cars drove by. The world kept moving while she sat frozen in place, trapped between fear and exhaustion, between giving up and holding on. She didn't know that her life was about to change. She didn't know that in just a few minutes a car would pull up to the curb. She didn't know that someone would finally stop, would finally see her, would finally care. All she knew was the cold, the fear, and the weight of her sleeping baby in her arms. All she knew was that she had never felt more alone in her entire life. The headlights appeared first, cutting through the darkness like two bright eyes. She barely noticed. Another car, another group of people who would drive past without seeing her. She had stopped hoping an hour ago. But then something different happened. The car slowed down. Not just slowed, but actually pulled over to the curb right in front of the bus stop where she sat. It was the expensive-looking black car, the kind she had only seen in movies or parked outside fancy hotels downtown. Her first instinct was fear. She pulled the baby closer and tried to make herself smaller against the wall. In her experience, when men in expensive cars stopped near women like her, it was never for good reasons. She had heard stories, terrible stories. The back door opened and a man stepped out. He was older, maybe in his 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of rent. His shoes were polished to a shine even in the dim streetlight. For a moment, he just stood there looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She waited for whatever was coming. The crude proposal. The lecture about getting her life together. The demand that she move along because she was bad for the neighborhood. She had heard it all before from different people in different situations. But he didn't say any of those things. Instead, he took a few careful steps toward her, moving slowly like someone approaching a frightened animal. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was gentle. "Are you all right?" The question was so unexpected that she didn't know how to answer. Was she all right? She had a black eye, a split lip, bruises everywhere, and she was sitting on a frozen sidewalk with her baby at nearly 10 o'clock at night. No, she definitely was not all right. "I'm fine," she heard herself say anyway. The lie came automatically. She had spent so long pretending everything was fine that the words came out without thought. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. It wasn't pity exactly. It was something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Like he understood that she was lying and he understood why. "I don't think you are," he said quietly. Then he did something that shocked her completely. He started taking off his jacket. The night air was freezing, and this man was removing his expensive coat in the middle of the street. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You and your baby need this more than I do," he said simply. He held the jacket out toward her, but she didn't move. She couldn't. This didn't make sense. People didn't do things like this. Not for strangers. Not for people like her. When she didn't take it, he carefully draped the jacket over her shoulders, tucking it around both her and the baby. The fabric was warm from his body heat and softer than anything she had touched in months. It smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something clean and safe. "My name is David," he said, crouching down so he was at her eye level. "I know you don't know me, and I know you're probably scared. But I want to help you if you'll let me. She stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. Was this real? Was this some kind of trick? Her mind raced through possibilities, looking for the catch, the hidden danger. Why? She whispered. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had a different quality to it. Heavier somehow. A long time ago, my mother and I were in a situation not too different from yours. We were homeless for almost 6 months when I was 7 years old. I remember what it felt like when people looked through us like we were invisible. But I also remember the few people who stopped, who saw us, who helped. He pulled out his phone. Your baby needs to see a doctor. You need medical attention. Let me take you to the hospital. I don't have money for a hospital, she said, and tears started running down her cheeks before she could stop them. I don't have money for anything. I'm not asking you to pay, he said. Please, let me help you. She looked down at her baby, at the small face that looked too pale in the streetlight, the tiny body that had stopped shivering only because it had gotten dangerously cold. Every instinct told her to be suspicious, to protect herself and her child from potential danger. But another part of her, the part that was a mother first, knew that she was out of options. Okay, she whispered. David stood up and gestured toward the car. The driver, an older gentleman who had been waiting patiently, opened the back door wider. She struggled to her feet, her legs stiff from sitting in the cold for so long. David offered his arm to steady her, but he didn't push when she hesitated to take it. The inside of the car was warm. Blessedly, wonderfully warm. There were soft blankets on the seats, and David immediately wrapped one around her and the baby. The baby stirred for the first time in an hour, making a small sound that was almost normal. There's a children's hospital about 15 minutes from here, David said as the car pulled away from the curb. They have an excellent emergency department. I'm going to call ahead and let them know we're coming. She listened as he made the phone call, using words like priority and immediate attention and I'll handle all expenses. It felt surreal, like watching a scene from someone else's life. What's your baby's name? He asked after hanging up. She told him and he smiled. That's beautiful. How old? 9 months, her voice cracked. She needs formula. She hasn't eaten in hours. We'll take care of that right away, he promised. Then he reached into a small compartment in the car and pulled out a bottle of water. Here, you need to drink something too. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the bottle. She took small sips, the cool water painful against her split lip but desperately needed. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she had eaten or drunk anything. Can I ask what happened? David said carefully. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. She looked out the window at the city lights passing by. Part of her wanted to lie, to protect her dignity, to pretend this was just a temporary setback. But she was so tired of lying, so tired of pretending. My boyfriend, she said slowly. He got angry. He hurt me and threw us out. David's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. You don't have to go back there. Whatever happens next, you don't have to go back to someone who would do this to you. Fresh tears came then, hot and fast. I don't have anywhere else to go. We'll figure it out, he said with quiet certainty. One step at a time. First, we make sure you and your baby are medically okay. Then we figure out the rest. The hospital appeared ahead, bright and clean and full of people who could help. As the car pulled up to the emergency entrance, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It took her a moment to recognize what it was. Hope. David got out first and came around to help her. Medical staff were already waiting at the door with a wheelchair. Someone gently took the baby from her arms to examine her while someone else helped her into the chair. I'll be right here, David said as they wheeled her through the automatic doors. I'm not going anywhere. She looked back at him, this stranger who had stopped when everyone else kept driving. This man who had given her his jacket and his kindness without asking for anything in return. Why are you doing this? She asked again, needing to understand. He met her eyes and she saw the truth in them. Because someone did it for my mother and me. Because everyone deserves a chance. Because it's the right thing to do. He paused. And because I have the means to help, and that comes with responsibility. As they wheeled her into the warm, bright hospital, still wrapped in his jacket, she realized something important. She had spent so long feeling invisible, believing that nobody cared whether she lived or died. But tonight someone had seen her. Someone had stopped. Someone had cared. It wasn't much. Not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes a beginning is everything. She woke up confused. The bed was soft, too soft. For a moment of pure panic, she thought she was back in the apartment, that everything had been a dream. But then she opened her eyes and saw the white ceiling, the medical equipment, the morning sunlight streaming through clean windows. A hospital. She was in a hospital, her head whipped to the side, searching frantically. Where was her baby? Her heart hammered against her ribs until she saw the small bassinet next to her bed. Her daughter was there, sleeping peacefully, clean and wrapped in a soft white blanket. The sight made her burst into tears of pure relief. A nurse came in at the sound of her crying. A kind-faced woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun. "Oh, honey, it's all right. Your little one is just fine. She's been fed and checked over. Not a thing wrong with her except she was cold and hungry, and we've fixed both of those problems. How long have I been asleep?" Her voice came out rough and scratchy. "About 10 hours. It's almost 9 in the morning now. The doctor gave you something to help you rest. Your body needed it." The nurse checked the monitors beside the bed. "You've got some bruised ribs, but nothing's broken. We've cleaned and treated all your cuts. You're going to be sore for a while, but you'll heal." The memories came flooding back then. The cold sidewalk, the expensive car, the man who had given her his jacket. It all seemed impossible in the bright light of day. "There was a man," she said. "David, he brought us here." "Is he Mr. Wellington?" The nurse smiled. "He's been here most of the night. He finally went home about an hour ago, but he left his number and said to call him the moment you woke up. He's also paid for all your medical care, including a private room for as long as you need it." She stared at the nurse, trying to process this information. A private room? All her medical care? Why would anyone do that for a complete stranger? "There's also a social worker who needs to speak with you," the nurse continued gently. "Her name is Patricia, and she's very nice. She just needs to document what happened and see what resources we can connect you with. Is that okay?" She nodded, though the thought of telling her story again made her want to hide under the blankets. Patricia arrived about 20 minutes later, after she had eaten some breakfast and fed her baby a bottle. The social worker was younger than she expected, maybe in her 30s, with a warm smile and tired eyes that suggested she had heard too many sad stories. They talked for almost an hour. Patricia asked questions but never pushed, never judged. She wrote things down on her tablet and made phone calls. By the end of it, she had appointments set up at 3 different assistance programs and a temporary spot secured at a family shelter starting tomorrow. "Mr. Wellington also asked me to give you this," Patricia said, handing her a business card. "He wanted you to have his direct number. He said to call him when you're ready to talk." After Patricia left, she sat holding the card, running her thumb over the raised letters. David Wellington. Below his name were several phone numbers and an email address. In the bottom corner, it said, "Wellington Properties, President and CEO." She looked it up on the hospital's public computer later that afternoon. Wellington Properties was one of the largest real estate companies in the state. David Wellington was worth, according to the internet, somewhere over $100 million. She stared at the number until her eyes went blurry. Why would someone like that stop for someone like her? She finally called him that evening, after the nurses had helped her shower and she was sitting in clean clothes the hospital had provided. Her hands shook as she dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. "Hello? It's me. From last night. I just wanted to say thank you." The words felt completely inadequate. "I'm glad you called. How are you feeling? How's the baby?" They talked for a few minutes about the medical care, about the social worker, about the shelter placement. He listened like he genuinely cared about the answers, not like someone just being polite. "I need to ask you something," she said finally, "and I need you to be honest with me. Why are you doing all this? What do you want from me?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's a fair question. You don't know me, and you have every reason to be suspicious." He took a breath. "I don't want anything from you. What I told you last night was true. My mother and I were homeless when I was a kid. A businessman named Frank Chen gave us a chance. He paid for an apartment for 6 months, helped my mother get a job at his company, made sure I could stay in school. He changed our entire lives. What happened to him? He passed away 15 years ago. I went to his funeral and tried to thank his family, tried to explain what he'd done for us. You know what his daughter told me? She said he helped dozens of people over his lifetime and he never talked about it. He just did it because he believed that people with resources have a responsibility to help people who need it. She wiped tears from her cheeks with her free hand. I can't pay Frank back, David continued, but I can pay it forward. I've been successful in business, more successful than I ever dreamed possible, and none of it would have happened without someone giving my mother and me a chance when we had nothing. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just focus on getting better and taking care of your daughter. The shelter Patricia found for you is a good one, but shelters have rules and time limits. When you're ready, I'd like to talk to you about what comes next. Not tonight. When you're ready. They said goodbye, and she sat holding the phone long after the call ended. Her baby made a small sound from the bassinet, and she reached over to stroke the soft cheek. Over the next 2 days in the hospital, she had a lot of time to think. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and bringing meals. Her baby got stronger and happier with each feeding. The bruises on her own face started to turn from purple to yellow. She looked less like a victim and more like a person again. David visited once, bringing toys for the baby and a bag of clothes for her. I asked my assistant to pick some things up, he said. I hope they fit okay. She guessed at your size. The clothes were simple but good quality. Jeans, sweaters, practical shoes. Things she could actually wear, not charity cast-offs that screamed poverty. I can't accept all this, she protested, even as part of her desperately wanted to. Yes, you can, please. He sat in the chair beside her bed. I want to propose something to you, but I need you to think about it carefully before you answer. She waited, her heart beating faster. The shelter is good for emergency situations, but it's crowded and has a lot of restrictions. You can only stay 30 days maximum. I own several rental properties around the city. One of them is a small 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. It's between tenants right now. I'd like to offer it to you rent-free for 6 months while you get back on your feet. She couldn't breathe. Why would you do that? Because 6 months isn't enough time in a shelter to really rebuild. You need stability. Your daughter needs stability. In 6 months, you could finish your degree, find a job, save some money, actually have a chance instead of just surviving day to day. I don't understand people like you, she said, and it came out almost like an accusation. I've spent my whole life watching people look the other way. Watching people step over homeless people on the street. Watching people pretend that suffering doesn't exist if they don't look at it directly, and then you show up out of nowhere and offer me things I can't even imagine. I'm not special, David said quietly. I'm just someone who remembers what it's like to be cold and scared and hungry. I'm just someone who had help when I needed it most. He leaned forward. Here's the truth. I'm wealthy. Very wealthy. And you know what? That money sits in accounts and accumulates, and it doesn't make me any happier. But helping someone who actually needs it, that means something. That matters. She looked at her sleeping baby, at the peaceful little face that deserved so much more than cold sidewalks and fear. Okay, she whispered. Okay, thank you. David smiled, and it reached all the way to his eyes. Thank you for trusting me. Now let's talk about the details, and let's talk about what you want to do with this chance. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself think about the future. Not just surviving the next day or the next hour, but actually building something. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. The sun was setting outside the hospital window, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow she would be discharged. Tomorrow her new life would really begin. She didn't know if she could do this. Didn't know if she was strong enough or smart enough or brave enough. But she knew one thing for certain. She was going to try. The apartment was small but perfect. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with windows that actually let in sunlight. She stood in the doorway on that first day, holding her baby on her hip, and couldn't quite believe it was real. The furniture came with the place, David explained, showing her around. Basic stuff, but it's clean and functional. I had my assistant stock the kitchen with some essentials to get you started. Diapers and formula, too. She walked through slowly, touching the clean counters, the working refrigerator, the soft couch. It wasn't fancy. The carpet was old and the walls needed paint. But it was warm and safe and hers, at least for now. I don't know how to thank you, she said for what felt like the 100th time. Stop thanking me and start planning, David said with a smile. You told me you were 2 years into a business degree before you had to drop out. Is that still something you want to finish? She had barely let herself think about college in months. It had felt like a dream from another lifetime, something that belonged to a different person. I don't know if I can. With the baby and no money for tuition, there are online programs, financial aid, scholarships for parents in tough situations. He handed her a folder. I took the liberty of having my assistant research some options. No pressure, but if you're interested, I know some people at the community college who might be able to help. That night, after David left and she had fed and bathed her baby, she sat on the couch and opened the folder. Inside were printouts about online degree programs, information about childcare assistance, applications for grants. Someone had even highlighted the relevant sections and added notes in the margins. She cried again, but this time they were different tears. Not despair, but something closer to overwhelm at the sheer kindness of strangers. The first few weeks were harder than she expected. David had connected her with a counselor who specialized in helping people recover from abusive relationships. She almost didn't go to the first appointment, telling herself she didn't need therapy, that she just needed to move forward and forget. But the counselor, an older woman named Rita, had a way of asking questions that made her realize how much she had been carrying. The shame, the guilt, the voice in her head that kept insisting this was all her fault, that she had deserved what happened. You didn't deserve to be hurt, Rita said firmly during their third session. No matter what you did or didn't do, violence is never justified. You understand that, right? Intellectually, she knew it was true, but believing it in her heart was different. The therapy helped slowly. So did the structure of daily life. David had arranged for childcare 3 mornings a week, through a program that helped low-income parents. Those first few times leaving her baby with someone else nearly killed her. She stood outside the daycare for 20 minutes the first day, fighting the urge to rush back in and take her daughter home. But the baby was fine. Better than fine. She played with other children, learned new things, laughed with the caregivers. And those 3 mornings gave her time to attend online classes, study at the library, and start rebuilding the life she had lost. 2 months in, something happened that tested everything. She was walking back from the grocery store when she saw him, her ex-boyfriend standing on the corner near a bus stop. Her entire body went cold. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear. He saw her too. Started walking toward her with that familiar expression she knew too well, anger mixed with something that might have been desperation. She stood frozen, her hands gripping the stroller handle so tight her knuckles turned white. Her phone was in her pocket. She could call someone. Should call someone. But her mind had gone blank with fear. "We need to talk," he said when he got close. Not a request, a demand. "No." The word came out stronger than she felt. "I have a restraining order. You're not supposed to be near me." "That's ridiculous. I just want to talk about us, about our family." He reached toward the stroller and she stepped back. "There is no us. Not anymore." Her voice shook, but she kept talking. "You need to leave, now." People were starting to notice. A man across the street had stopped and pulled out his phone. An older woman was watching from a nearby shop doorway. "You can't do this without me," he said, his voice getting louder. "You have nothing. You are nothing without me." And there it was. The thing he had been telling her for years, the lie she had almost believed. But standing there in the sunlight, with her daughter sleeping peacefully in the stroller, with an apartment that was warm and safe, with people who believed in her, she realized something important. He was wrong. "I'm doing just fine without you," she said. "Better than fine. And you need to leave before I call the police." He opened his mouth to argue, but the man across the street was already walking over. "Everything okay here, miss?" Her ex looked at the man, then at the growing number of people paying attention, and his face twisted with anger. But he was a coward at heart, and cowards don't like witnesses. He turned and walked away, throwing threats over his shoulder that sounded empty even to her. She stood there shaking for a full minute after he disappeared. Then she thanked the man who had come to help, got her baby home, and called Rita, her counselor. They talked for almost an hour. Rita reminded her that seeing him was traumatic, that it was okay to be scared, but that she had done exactly the right thing. That night she called David too. She had been trying not to bother him too much, aware that he was a busy man with his own life. But he answered right away and listened to the whole story. "I'm proud of you," he said when she finished. "That took real courage." I was terrified. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's doing the right thing even when you are afraid. He paused. How would you feel about taking a self-defense class? I know someone who teaches women's safety courses. Might help you feel more confident? She said yes. She started saying yes to a lot of things during those months. Yes to the self-defense classes. Yes to joining a support group for single mothers. Yes to accepting help from her new neighbors when they offered to watch the baby for an hour. Yes to reaching out to her parents, who cried on the phone and begged her forgiveness for not being there when she needed them. Her college classes were going well. Better than well, actually. She had forgotten how much she enjoyed learning, how good it felt to challenge her brain with new concepts and ideas. Her professors were understanding about her situation, giving her flexibility when the baby was sick or daycare fell through. 6 months after moving into the apartment, David invited her to lunch. They met at a quiet cafe near his office, and she brought her daughter along in the stroller. The baby was bigger now, almost walking, babbling constantly and reaching for everything. "You've done really well," David said after they ordered. "I've been getting updates from Rita and your academic advisor. They're both impressed with your progress." She felt herself blushing. "I'm just trying to take it one day at a time." "That's smart. But I think it's time to start thinking bigger picture." He pulled out some papers. "You've finished almost a full year of classes. You're on track to get your degree in another year and a half. Have you thought about what you want to do after that?" "Get a job. Support my daughter. Stand on my own 2 feet, all good goals. But I want to challenge you to think beyond just surviving. What do you actually want to do? Not what you think you should do or what's practical. What would make you excited to get up in the morning?" No one had ever asked her that before. She thought about it while the baby threw crackers on the floor and she picked them up for the 10th time. "I want to help people," she said finally. "People like me. People who feel trapped and don't know how to get out. I want to be the person who stops, like you stopped for me," David smiled. "Then that's what you should work toward. There are jobs in social services, in nonprofits, in community outreach. You'd be good at it too because you've lived it. You understand what it's like. But those jobs don't pay much. I need to support us, one step at a time, remember? First finish your degree, then we'll worry about the rest. I'm not going anywhere. This isn't a 6-month deal that ends and you're on your own. I'm invested in seeing you succeed." He leaned back. "Besides, I've got an idea I want to run past you. But not yet. You've got enough on your plate. Ask me again in a year." The rest of that first year passed in a blur of classes, childcare, therapy sessions, and slow, steady healing. She made friends in her online study groups, started going to a church near her apartment where people were kind and didn't ask too many questions, celebrated her daughter's first birthday with a small party that included David, Rita, her neighbors, and her parents who flew in for the occasion. She still had hard days. Days when the fear came back and she checked the locks 3 times before bed. Days when she felt overwhelmed by all the things she still needed to figure out. Days when she worried that this was all temporary, that it would all fall apart. But those days became less frequent. And on the good days, she could see the person she was becoming. Stronger, braver, someone who had been broken and was putting herself back together, not the same as before, but different. Better maybe, she wasn't there yet. Wasn't completely healed or totally independent. But she was on her way, and that was enough. 3 years later, she stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment bathroom, adjusting her blazer for the 5th time. Her daughter, now almost 4 years old, sat on the counter watching with big, curious eyes. "Mama, you look pretty," the little girl said, reaching out to touch the fabric. "Thank you, baby." She smiled at her reflection, barely recognizing the woman looking back. Gone were the bruises and the haunted look. In their place was someone who stood straight, whose eyes were clear, who looked like she belonged in the professional clothes she wore. Today was important. Today she was starting her new job as a community outreach coordinator for Wellington Properties. After finishing her degree 6 months ago with honors, she had applied for several positions. But it was David who had approached her with an opportunity she hadn't expected. "We're expanding our community programs," he had told her over coffee. "I want someone who understands what it's like to need help. Someone who won't just throw money at problems but will actually connect with people. I think that's you." She had been nervous about accepting, worried that people would think she only got the job because David had helped her, worried that she wasn't qualified enough, experienced enough, good enough. But Rita, her counselor who had become something like a friend over the years, had set her straight. Stop waiting for permission to succeed. You earned your degree. You've got real-world experience that most social workers could never understand. Take the job and prove them right for hiring you. So she had said yes. And now here she was on her first day feeling like her heart might beat right out of her chest. Her daughter's daycare was on the way to the office. It was a good facility, one that David had helped her find when she first started classes. The teachers knew her story, or at least parts of it, and they had watched her daughter grow from a quiet, clingy baby into a confident, chatty preschooler. "Be good today, okay?" she said, kissing her daughter's forehead as they stood at the daycare entrance. "I'm always good. Mama?" The little girl grinned and ran off to join her friends without a backward glance. She stood there for a moment, watching through the window. Her daughter was happy, healthy, safe. Everything she had dreamed of during those dark days on the cold sidewalk felt like it had happened to someone else, but the memories were still there, still real, still important. The Wellington Properties office was downtown, in a tall building with glass windows that reflected the morning sun. She rode the elevator to the 7th floor, clutching her bag and trying to remember everything she had prepared. David was waiting in the lobby of the office suite. "Ready for your first day?" "Terrified but ready," he laughed. "Good. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried." He walked her through the office, introducing her to people whose names she knew she wouldn't remember by lunchtime. Everyone was friendly, professional, welcoming. Her office was small but had a window. There was a desk, a computer, file cabinets, and a small sitting area with 2 chairs. On the desk was a card from the team welcoming her aboard. "Your main focus will be coordinating our tenant assistance programs," David explained as she settled into her chair. "We've got about 40 families across our properties who are in vulnerable situations. Some are behind on rent because of medical emergencies. Some are dealing with job loss. Some are escaping bad situations like you did. Your job is to connect them with resources, help them stay housed, and prevent them from ending up on the street." She thought about that bus stop 3 years ago, about how close she had come to losing everything. "I can do that. I know you can. That's why I hired you." The first few weeks were overwhelming in the best way. She met with families, listened to their stories, helped them fill out assistance applications, connected them with food banks and job training programs and childcare resources. Every person she helped felt like a small victory. But it was during her 2nd month that everything really clicked into place. She was reviewing cases one afternoon when she noticed a pattern. 3 different families in 3 different properties all dealing with the same issue. They needed help but didn't qualify for existing programs because they made slightly too much money, or didn't fit the right categories. She spent a week researching and putting together a proposal. Then she asked for a meeting with David and the property management team. "I want to start a new program," she told them, her voice steady despite her nerves. "A bridge assistance fund specifically for people who fall through the cracks of traditional services. Small grants, maybe $500 to $2,000 to help with emergencies. A broken-down car that keeps someone from getting to work. An unexpected medical bill. First month's childcare costs. The kinds of things that seem small to us but can destroy someone's stability." The room was quiet. She couldn't read their expressions. "I know it sounds like just giving people money," she continued, "but I've been researching the data. Small interventions at the right time can prevent much bigger problems. It's actually cost-effective in the long run because it keeps people housed and prevents evictions." David leaned forward. "How would you administer it? How do we make sure the money actually helps?" She had anticipated this question. She walked them through her plan. Application process, verification, follow-up, partnerships with community organizations. She had thought of everything. "I like it," David said finally. "Write up a detailed proposal and let's pilot it in 3 properties. We'll give it 6 months and see what happens." She left that meeting feeling like she was floating. This was what she had wanted. Not just a job, but a chance to actually make a difference. The pilot program launched 2 months later. In the first month, they helped 12 families. By month 3, word had spread and they were getting applications from across the city. The local news did a story about the program, interviewing one of the families they had helped, a single father who had kept his apartment because a $500 grant had covered his car repair, allowing him to keep his job. David called her into his office after seeing the news segment. "I've been thinking," he said. "This program should be bigger than just our properties. What if we turned it into a full foundation, something that could help people across the whole city, not just our tenants? Her breath caught. A foundation? I'm prepared to put up initial funding. $2 million to start. But I want you to run it. You'd be the executive director. You'd build the team, create the programs, make the decisions. He looked at her seriously. This is what you've been working toward, isn't it? This is how you help people like you. She thought about that night 3 years ago, about the cold and the fear and the absolute certainty that nobody cared, about David stopping when everyone else kept driving, about the jacket he had given her, which she still had hanging in her closet at home. Yes, she whispered. Yes, this is exactly what I want to do. The foundation launched 6 months later. They called it Second Chances, and the logo was simple but meaningful. A door slightly open with light streaming through. The opening event was held at a community center downtown. Local officials came. News cameras, donors and volunteers, families they had already helped. She stood at the podium in front of all these people and told her story. Not all of it, but enough. Enough for people to understand why this mattered. 3 years ago, I was sitting on a sidewalk with my baby in my arms, believing that nobody cared whether we lived or died, she said, her voice carrying through the room. One person proved me wrong. One person stopped and saw me as a human being worth helping. That changed everything. She looked at David, who was standing off to the side. He nodded at her to continue. But here's what I've learned since then. It's not enough for one person to help one other person, though that matters tremendously. We need systems. We need communities that catch people before they fall too far. We need programs that give people not just immediate help, but real pathways to stability and success. She talked about the foundation's programs, the emergency grants, the job training partnerships, the counseling services, the child care assistance, all designed to help people at their most vulnerable moments. After the speeches and the applause, after the networking and the photographs, she found herself outside getting some air. Her daughter was with her mother, who had moved to the city 6 months ago to be closer to her granddaughter. She had time to just breathe and think about how far she had come. David found her there. You did good today. We did good. None of this happens without you. No, he said firmly. This happens because you took the chance I offered and built something with it. You could have just taken the apartment and the help and been content with getting by. Instead, you worked harder than anyone I've ever seen. You earned every bit of this. She looked up at the evening sky, at the stars just starting to appear. Do you ever think about how random it was? That you happened to drive down that street that night? That you happened to look out the window at exactly the right moment? I used to think it was random, David said. But now I think maybe we notice what we're meant to notice. I saw you because I remembered being you. And now you'll see others because you remember too. That's how it spreads. That's how we change things. In the first year, the Second Chances Foundation helped over 300 families. By year 2, they had expanded to 4 cities. The programs worked because they were designed by someone who understood what it felt like to need help. Who knew that people didn't need judgment or lectures. They needed resources and respect and someone who believed they could do better. She still lived in the same small apartment, though she could afford more now. She had started paying rent to David 6 months after getting her first job, insisting on it even though he said it wasn't necessary. The apartment had become home. The neighborhood had become her community. Her daughter was thriving in kindergarten now, a bright, confident child who knew she was loved and safe. She didn't remember those early days, those desperate times. She would grow up knowing a different story, a story about her mother's strength and the kindness of strangers and how the world could be good. Sometimes, on her way home from work, she would drive past that bus stop where it all began. She never stopped, but she always looked, and she always remembered. The cold, the fear, the moment when everything changed. She remembered because forgetting would dishonor the struggle. And because remembering reminded her why she did this work, why it mattered. Everyone deserved what she had been given, a chance, a choice, a future. And she was going to spend the rest of her life making sure as many people as possible got exactly that.